this is really exciting for me. I've never been asked to talk for 45 minutes. Usually I just read and then answer questions. And I am going to read, because that's part of what I love doing with this thing that I've written. First of all, how many of you think maybe that memoir is your #1 favorite kind of writing? Just a few, yeah. It's a great way to start writing because, you know, how everybody says, write what you know, and memoir is what we know. And it's been really working for me. And my next book, I think, is also going to be of a personal nature. So my background, I acted for about, it was about 12 years, sort of off and on. But at a certain point, I had children. And we were living in California, and my husband, who's an actor, was also starting to travel quite a bit. And our house was destroyed in an earthquake in 1994, and we had to leave and go somewhere safe. And so we chose Philadelphia, which is where I grew up. And from there, I got into freelance editing with a friend, not because I really knew anything about it or had any specific training in it. I just liked to read, and I was running with this girl who used to work for a magazine, and somebody had asked her to edit some book, and I said, oh, that's something I always thought maybe I'd like to do, because I'm always thinking about what's wrong with a book or what's good about a book when I'm reading it. And she said, well, why don't you help me? And so we did it together, and the book ended up getting published, and it was just a really life-changing experience, which led me to a few more assignments and stuff, just freelance things. And eventually I rewrote this one book that came in that was for teenagers. And that's when I suddenly realized that I liked to write. And so seriously, I have never taken a writing course. I majored in French literature and theater in college. And so I did have to write a lot of papers about French books. And you know, back then it was like I was in my early 20s, late teens, and you know, they'd say, this paper must be 500 words long. And I just, you know, I'd sit there and I would just try to get 500 words of French onto a page. Really, there was nothing useful about what I was writing. It's almost embarrassing. And I found that the experience of writing this book was so different. At a certain point when I was editing, my mother moved up from Florida to Philadelphia. She and my father had retired down there, and when he died, she moved back up. And that was something I asked her to do, but not something that I really wanted her to do, because we had had an interesting relationship growing up. And most of my siblings had kind of scattered away from her, including me. I had one who'd gone to England, another who'd gone up to Vermont, and there was another one in New Jersey. Here I'm asking her to come back and live near me. And it was really hard. And by the time we got to about 2007, I was at the point where I was like, she was sort of over here. And I would, you know, only talk to her when we had some business to take care of. And but I said to her, I'll be there to help you if you ever really need me. And so she got cancer, which was and so, you know, I was going around with her to the doctors and doing all the things that you have to do, and we were actually getting along okay. It seemed like during crisis we managed to sort of get along with each other. And I was sending emails to my siblings about what the doctors were saying and all the different tests and things. And, you know, there were these moments that we were having together where I kind of felt like, gosh, I think my sisters and brother might like to have been there for that conversation. And so I started sort of including in the emails these little snippets of conversations that we were having, almost as if I was trying to reassure them that we were, you know, not in complete disaster mode. We were actually able to have some nice times. And they actually liked these emails. And this one sister said, keep them coming, and I think you're onto something. Our mother is extremely unusual, and everybody always says they write about their parents and they never do it, and I think you're going to do it. So I was like, well, I don't know if I'm going to write about my mother. I was kind of busy because I had these 3 teenagers and my husband was traveling and I was dealing with this medical stuff. But I was taking notes. I was carrying around a notebook everywhere I went with the doctors. And so I started writing down the conversations when they struck me and putting them in these emails. And at one point, I realized that I really was writing a book, and there's this one chapter that ended up in the actual book that is fully in email form. It is a letter to my siblings. So it's kind of cool that one of them managed to stay. But I knew who I was writing to, and I think that's probably something that you've already been told. But with personal memoir, I think that's an extremely important thing to keep in mind. Once you finally figure out who you're writing to, it almost can happen by itself. I was writing to my sister at first, and to my siblings, and I was sort of setting down a record for the family of a period of time that we were having. It was important. And then when things started getting really complicated, because the medical system for elderly people is horrible, I realized that I was writing to my friends, because I had so many friends who were going through the same sort of thing with their parents and their children. And then at the end, what I finally figured out was that I was writing to my mother. Because I would finish these chapters once they started to become chapters, and I would, when I felt ready, and I had to wait until I had a flattering chapter to read to her the first time. When I felt ready, I would sort of go over and I'd read it to her, and she would laugh, because what I had forgotten is that my mother loves to be the center of attention, but also that she was a portrait painter. And so people used to line up to get her to paint portraits of them and their children and stuff. And so she really understood that when I was showing her warts, with a certain degree of love, depending on which part of the book you're reading, that I was giving a portrayal of my mother that might not really have anything to do with who she actually saw herself as, or who other people might see her as, but it was simply who I saw her as and how I saw her. And she really understood that, because when she was painting portraits, people, she would run across somebody whose husband wanted the portrait done, and she didn't really want a portrait of herself done. And she'd look at this thing my mother was doing, and she'd say, I don't think my eyes are crossed. Could you uncross my eyes? Or I don't have a unibrow, or I look a little fat in this. And my mother was always sort of trying to get her perspective as an artist looking at a person on the canvas. And it was frustrating and difficult when there was somebody who wanted it to be a flattering, the best lighting or whatever. And so she got that when she was listening to me read her book, this book out loud, and that became a part of the story that was unfolding as I was writing the book, was this chance for my mother and I to finally get to know each other, and for her to really understand who I was, because one of the things she didn't know about me was that I had a sense of humor, because I used to shut down when I was around her. And once she heard my voice and saw, how I saw things and that it was funny, it was almost like we got to know each other for the first time. So it was very exciting. And once I got going, I was totally hooked. And this thing was bursting out of me. I had no trouble with how many words I was getting on the page. And I started to realize, and this was sort of like a miracle, and I don't know if this happens to everybody, but I have a feeling it does. I have a feeling that even though real life seems sort of unstructured, that if you are telling a story about yourself, you're going to find the classic elements to your story or your family's story. And I was absolutely amazed, because what we had in the beginning was a conflict. We had a difficult relationship and we had a health crisis, so there was our conflict. We had a protagonist. We actually had 2 protagonists. One was my mother, who was ill, and the other was me, who was stuck at the sharp end of the stick. And then we had an antagonist, which I thought at first was the cancer, and it turned out that it was actually the medical system, most specifically my mother's HMO, which is her health insurance, which I gave a pseudonym. I gave pseudonyms to everybody except the family. And the pseudonym I gave for the HMO is ESD, which are letters that stand for something. And try to keep that in mind, because I'm going to do a reading and maybe you'll be able to figure out what those initials stand for. And then the next part of the structure, you need a special hook of some sort, something that makes your story unique. And what made our story unique, because who cares about somebody's mother and her health crisis? You know, everybody has a mother, and everybody has a mother who has a health crisis at some point, whether they're there or not. But the thing that made my mother unique was that in the middle of the health crisis, in fact, about 2 weeks before her pivotal cancer surgery, she became an Orthodox Christian nun. And she was 85 when this happened. So that was what made us unique. And later with the publishers, they really pumped that up. They made me bring the nun stuff into the first chapter instead of saving it for later. And then, of course, what you need is a major turning point, you know, a moment where everything seems fine, you know, when you're watching a movie and everything, and you think, wait a second, I think this movie, there's like about 25 minutes left of this movie, so I'm not sure if this great situation is really going to last. And we had that. We had, you know, cancer cured, everything great, and then we had this horrible crisis where everything went, whoa, way down, and I was still writing the book, and I'm looking, and it's like, you know, you go through a horrible crisis, and you're devastated, and worried about your mother and everything, but, you know, there was this little part of me in the back that was like, I can write about this. This is really good. It's a terrible feeling. I feel so guilty, but she understood it too. It was almost like she'd call me up and she'd say, okay, something happened. Something really awful happened. And then, of course, you get, at the very end, the happy ending, a conclusion, which I wasn't expecting. I really wasn't expecting. And do you guys know what Deus Ex Machina is? It's where it's, you know, started, I think it began in Greek tragedy, where everything sucks. You know, your protagonist is in complete disarray, it's the worst of the worst. And then suddenly the clouds open, and this sort of a god of some sort comes down out of the sky and sort of says, okay, you go there, and you go there, and you go there, and we're done. And everybody's okay, and it's like, whoa. And that happened to us. We had a Deus Ex Machina in our story. And it was just, I was with my sister at the time, and we just ran to the bathroom, and I wrote about it in the book. We're like jumping up and down and screaming because it's such a good news, but also because it's going to go in the book! It's going to go in the book! And it was just so incredible. So, sorry, I'm a little... So, one of the things that somebody sent me in an email about this, you know, that you're interested in is, you know how there are people that feel this need to exaggerate in their memoirs, and it's been in the news lately. And the most notorious story is James Frey, who wrote A Million Little Pieces, which I read when everybody thought it was a memoir, before Oprah had chosen it as one of her top books. And I loved it, and I picked it for my reading group, and then I had to read it a second time. And by the time my reading group got to my house, they had read it for the first time, and I had read it for the second time. So they were all in sort of euphoria. Oh, what a wonderful book. Oh, what a wonderful book. And I was sort of, I'm not sure I'm buying this. I'm not sure this really happened. And as it turned out, not everything in that book did actually happen. And when he went to his agent or his publisher or whatever, there was somebody at some point who took this piece of writing that he says was originally intended as fiction, and said, this is close enough to your real life, isn't it, that we could make this non-fiction. And we'll never know, you know, how that was decided. But it did end up becoming a piece of what was called non-fiction. Which, you know, I think if I'd read that book as a piece of fiction, I would have liked it just as much as I did as non-fiction. So I sort of think you have to be careful about that. And this was an issue that I had because my mother, who is a very colorful character, is not a complete and total nightmare. I mean, to me, she was a complete and total nightmare. But she was nothing like the mothers in some of these memoirs that I have read and have so much respect for. Augustine Burroughs, Running with Scissors, his mother sent him to move in and live with his psychiatrist because she couldn't raise him herself. And then she accused his psychiatrist of raping her. So that's a crazy mother. And then there was the one in the Glass Castle, which stars Jeanette Walls. This woman, she's on Park Avenue, she's getting ready to get into a car to go to a fancy party. And she looks at this homeless woman on the street by the car and realizes it's her mother. And, you know, I had nothing like that. I didn't have anything like Mary Carr in Liar's Club, whose mother used to run around with a butcher's knife and made a bonfire of her sister and her toys in the house. I just didn't have anything quite that traumatic. But I did have traumatized family members who, there was one chapter that I wrote, and they asked me to take it out because they just didn't want to relive that. So I had all these sort of issues about how I was going to get across the impact of my mother without upsetting my family, and that mattered to me. I did not want to upset my family. And without, it was a funny balance because it was like my mother's toned down a little bit in the book, but I'm trying to show her for as, you know, as bad as she can get. And this funny little line that I was walking ended up making me very fearful that I was going to sound like a whiner because I wasn't giving all of the facts of what she could be like. But what I hit on was I would, when I could, with her blessing, I would include little snippets of conversation where she showed her true colors. And I'm going to read one of those right now. This is pretty creepy, but it has to do with her upbringing. And you know, she is actually a very sweet person, but she has certain things that she's never been exposed to. And in this situation, we were interviewing somebody. We were doing the intake because this man was going to bring people, send people to help her when I couldn't be there, you know, home health aides. And so they're doing he's filling out the form. And it goes like this: Michael, I have a very nice, competent woman named Miriam who can come on Sunday morning. Mom, is she dark-skinned? Michael, yes, she is. Why? Mom, is she light-fingered? See, that's my mother. Now, she's also adorable, but she can be quite horrible and quite embarrassing. And so there I was, sitting in these doctor's offices with this mother who I never knew what was going to come out of her mouth, taking notes, feeling a little bit empowered in a powerless situation because I always knew that when something bad happened, I was going to be able to put it in the book. And I was being very strict about sticking to the facts of the story. I didn't know where the story was going. And when something dreadful happened, I would store it away. And I can remember there was this one moment where I was sitting down and I had to write about this thing that happened. And it was like there was a gremlin on my shoulder. It was this character that had come into the story, and I was going to have to do, and I thought I was going to do a straightforward, you know, just reproduce the conversation because it was a necessary plot point. But I found that what I really needed to do was the subtext. So this is a big reading. This is my big reading. And what you need,
if you'd like a chair.
Oh, that'd be great. Now, this is a 5-minute reading. And remember, I'm an actress, so you know. This scene took place in 2008, which means that George Bush. It was early 2008, so George Bush was still our president. My mother had recovered from the cancer. She was a nun. And as soon as she got well enough, she wanted desperately to go to her church, which was 2 hours from home. And she went, and it was her first big appearance as Mother Bridget at the church, and she had her nun habit on and everything. And she got up out of her seat against the rules of the priest and went to light a candle during the service and tripped on her nun habit and fell and broke her hip and her shoulder. And that was our complete disaster. So spoiler. But anyway, She went into rehab there after she had hip and shoulder surgery, and I was 2 hours from home. My husband was doing a play in New York. I had these 3 teenagers that I didn't like to leave alone, and I was driving up to Carlisle and back 2 hours all the time, just constantly. And the rest of the time I was on the phone trying to get my mother's health insurance stuff sorted out and make sure she got the treatment and the recovery that she needed. And this is a conversation in which I discovered that the HMO, remember called ESD, was not all that it was cracked up to be. So now I'm going to read it. And I've done a little tiny bit of editing of this just to get as much of it out as I can. Ring, ring. Hello? Mrs. Morse. Yes? This is Bertie Walker. And this is where I paused. And I was like, it says, I am a, and I was like, I am a. And I knew what she was. I knew what her job was. She told me what her job was, and I wrote it down. But I couldn't. And so I wrote, this is Bertie Walker. I am a heartless creep from ESD. I'm calling to explain why we want to abandon your mother to molder in a rat-infested state home when she still has every chance of recovering. We plan to do this based on the technicality that the therapy for your mother's hip is not progressing according to our guidelines. It does not matter to us that her broken shoulder delayed her, and uninterrupted therapy could mean recovery in a matter of weeks. We definitely understand she's not yet able to change her own colostomy bag, and that if she has to come home right now, it will be impossible for her to cope at all since she can't walk yet, or even get out of bed unassisted. It is legal for us to do this to her because of our rigid and cleverly constructed rule system, which is designed not by medical professionals, but by money-grubbing fat cats who got George Bush elected and would also like to kill your children. Got it, Bertie. How does this appeal process work? Basically, Mrs. Morse, you try a series of appeals providing detailed letters from the many medical professionals caring for your mother now, who are justifiably appalled at our behavior, specifying why this decision is not just inexcusable but also seriously stupid. Through all these appeals, we will keep repeating the same denials until hopefully you will give up in exhaustion. I wouldn't count on my giving up, Bertie. Oh, you're welcome to try, Mrs. Morse, but it's a little irksome to us that your mother has an advocate like you. We could wrap things up so much more efficiently if the patient is old, can't write, is barely able to hold a phone, and is stuck alone to advocate on her own behalf. We have every confidence that you will fail miserably anyway. So you're telling me that you won't pay for my mother's care until she is better? That's right. We do realize we're being total monsters, so we'd like to offer you a tiny consolation. We'll pay for your mother's therapy for 3 days a week instead of the medically prescribed 5. This is what I'll tell you right now just to get you off our back. Hopefully you will think it's okay to stop paying attention. Then, when her therapist submits this inadequate program for authorization, it will go to a department that has no clue what is going on. Our hope is that the facility will think long and hard before admitting the next poor old lady who has the misfortune of being covered by ESD. The best outcome to all of this is if sometime soon, when people with HMOs like ESD need rehab, there will be no facilities willing to admit them at all. It will be a great savings all round. Don't you think it's really in all our best interest, yours included, if you just let your mother die as soon as possible? I'm sorry. It's actually your job to tell me to give up on my mother? Oh, come on, Mrs. Morse, don't act like you haven't thought of this already. My God, everyone thinks about giving up, Mrs. Morse, even if they're so repressed they can't admit it to themselves. Most people harbor tremendous resentment for their aging parents. Did you have a perfect childhood, Mrs. Morse? No, but... And how has your relationship been over the last several years? Not great, but I think it's been getting sort of better. Well, that's your problem, guilt. What? You pushed your mother to get the cancer treatment. You're trying to keep her alive as long as possible, right? Of course I am. Have you ever wondered why? Why what? Why you keep trying to help her if she was such a disappointment to you? What is it that makes you keep doing that? This is not about guilt. You can tell yourself that, but everyone's been there even if their parents were nothing but delightful. The fantasy about Dad dropping dead in the checkout line at the grocery store right after a perfect physical. Mom going to bed a month or so later, feeling fine and drifting off in her sleep. You'll feel much better if you just admit these thoughts, Mrs. Morse. This is sick. Yes, and that's the problem. You're repressing what you really want for your mother and driving yourself crazy trying to prove you're a good daughter. This behavior is bad for you, and quite frankly, it's bad for us. We have the misfortune of living in an era of such extreme medical advances that older parents are being cosseted and spoiled and kept alive far, far longer than they should be. Mrs. Morse, it's not exactly rational of you to help your mother out of guilt, and it's incredibly expensive for us. The bottom line is all this therapy and care is only putting off the inevitable. So that's where we come in. ESD is here for you in your time of need to provide some much-needed tough love. We make the practical decisions people like you can't bring yourselves to consider. Wait a second. I thought it was supposed to be the Democrats who wanted to pull the plug on Grandma. Healthcare reform hasn't even been initiated yet, and this is what you plan to do? This is our best-kept secret, Miss Morse. We've never needed a Democrat in the White House to put little old ladies out of their misery. Just get them to break their hips out of network, and we'll take it from there. Wow. I had no idea ESD's health management was so comprehensive. So, Miss Morse, have I satisfied your needs at this time? Thanks, Bertie. I think I'll stay in denial and work on that appeal. So has anybody guessed what the pseudonym stands for?
No.
ESD?
Everyone should die?
Close. Really close.
Begin with eat.
Eat. Yeah, there's the
And
word.
then a bad word.
And then a bad word.
Yeah, and then die.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I
That is what it is. And you know, I didn't curse much in this book, but I did curse in when I, yes. And so, you know, these people, I was so mad at them. I was so appalled when they said they weren't going to pay for my mother's therapy. But I had no idea that I was going to turn her into this, you know, sort of cartoon version of herself. But I couldn't stop myself. And my favorite compliment is when readers say, oh my God, I was reading your book in the dentist's office and I just was screaming with laughter. And I just love that. I love that. And I love it when they say, oh my God, and I burst into tears when I got to the picture of blah, blah, blah. And I will tell you, I wasn't aiming for that. It's not like you sort of, you say, okay, I'm going to make people laugh or I'm going to make people cry. Because that, you'll never get there if you do. It's like when you're acting and you're trying to make people laugh. You have to sort of not aim for it. It's sort of a Zen thing or something. But I will tell you that when I was writing, I was screaming with laughter at myself when I was writing this section. And when I got to the parts where people say they cried, I was crying when I was writing. And, you know, it would just kind of take me by surprise. And so I don't know how to tell you how to do that, but I think you should just keep yourselves open to it because it happens. And another thing is, I don't use a single, maybe one quotation mark in this entire book, and it's, I don't know why, I didn't know why I was doing it at the time, but I kind of feel like it's a good thing because of what I've given, these lines that I've given to ESD, that I don't actually have real quote marks or anything said. And so when I was putting the book together, I kept it private until I was ready. I reminded myself that it was a first draft. I let myself write anything I wanted. I didn't worry about whether I was going to hurt my mother's feelings. I didn't worry about whether I was going to give away some secret from her family that, you know, I just wrote everything I could. And I knew that eventually I was going to be able to pull it back later. And the miracle was that my mother was laughing it up and she was, you know, loving having her warts there. And one of the reasons that it was okay with her, for me to show her warts, is that I was being very, very scrupulous and very careful to include my own warts as much as possible. And I had plenty of warts. And there's a writer that I really look up to, David Sedaris, who writes about, he does some very funny personal essays about his family, in which he has just as much fun with his father and his mother and his sisters as he does with himself. I mean, if anything, he's more ridiculous than his family is. And that sort of makes it easy to stomach. So the other thing was when I'd sit down and I'd say, okay, I'm going to do the chapter about whatever. I I know what where I have to go in the story, because at that point I figured out I was covering a 2-year period of time in our lives. Okay, I know what information I need to get out, and I'd be looking at this blank document on my computer. And, that's just a horrible place to be, looking at that blank document. But I would remember what my mother said, because as a portrait painter, with a huge backlog of amazing portraits behind her, and people lined up waiting to do more, every time she faced that blank canvas with that subject there, she said she really didn't think she could do it. And I knew that she could do it, and so I somehow managed to escape writer's block, because I had that kind of reminder in my mind that you can do it. You just have to kind of stay calm. And with personal memoir stuff, the best thing you have, your best equipment, is your notes. And I had that notepad that I had taken around with me to all those doctors' offices, and I had all those emails that I had sent over the course of 2 years. And when I needed to cover a certain period of time, if I was stumped, I just went back and I read those things, and I would always find something. I'd find some little snippet of a conversation, the light-fingered conversation, and I would be able to build a whole chapter around it, knowing what story I needed to tell. And photos helped too. I was taking pictures of my mother, and I also was collecting old family pictures that I thought might apply, and I could use those, and I stuck them. If you look at the book, there's pictures all through it. And they became almost like exclamation points at the end of the paragraph. Something about when we lived in Ireland and I had a really difficult time, something happens. And then I just show a picture of myself at that time with me, this little 6-year-old girl standing in the corner with her knee socks. It just kind of said it all after I told the story. There was another picture of my mother when, I don't know why I decided to do this, but I took her, we had some time, we were driving around, not close to home, and I knew that this ancestral home of hers was somewhere nearby, and we went there, and we trespassed on it, and I took her and I put her in front of this great big huge old oak tree in the yard, and I took a picture of her, and that became a chapter called Family Tree, in which we went back and described her childhood. It was, just these things just happen, and you just keep taking pictures and keep taking notes and save them all together, and they're gonna work for you someday. So then, while I was writing, I was telling my friends that I was writing this book about my mother, and they said, well, are you going to have to wait until she dies to finish the book? And in the first place, I didn't want to wait until she died, because she wasn't planning to die anytime soon, and she's still alive now. She's 92. She just turned 92. She was 85 when I started writing this thing. So, also I wanted her to be there when it came out, because she was having so much fun. And besides that, there are so many people who write these books about their elderly parents going through a health crisis that they do end up with the parent dead at the end. Everybody's trying, and I just thought, I've got to put this out there now, and I've got to make sure people aren't expecting death at the end of this. And so, for a while, the title of the book was "Nobody Dies at the End of This Book," which I then, when somebody came up with this great title, "The Habit." This was a friend of mine, because a nun habit. There's that, and then there was me and my habit of taking care of my mother more than some people thought they would be able to do in that situation. My mother was a lifelong habit, and is a lifelong habit for me. So that was really good, but I did say "Nobody Dies at the End of This Book," and it is the first line of the book. It was fun. And I did figure out when I was going to end the book. We lived the ending one day, and we came home, and I said to my husband, I think we just lived the last chapter of the book. And it's sort of fun to be living your life and realizing that it's a chapter at the same time. That's cool. When I was doing the freelance editing, and we were able to get a couple of books published, and I was able to place the book I had co-authored with an agent, it was so much easier. And now I know it's a lot harder to get published. It's more competitive. Agents are more cautious. Publishers are strapped. And so when I started my agent search for this book, I went back to the agents that I had known who had said to me, bring me whatever else you write, and waited a very long time. It kind of passed me by. They said, we can't sell books like this anymore. We're just all in a terrible situation. We love this book. We love it better than other things you've written, but it's a different climate now. And so that was really, really hard. One agent in particular said to me, if you had written this as a blog, episode by episode, and gotten a following, I might be able to get it published for you. And I know you guys had Julie Powell here, who did that. She was writing a blog, and it turned into a book, which turned into a major motion picture. And so I put that out to you, that if I'd known that that was a way to get published when I was doing this, maybe I would have done it. I'm not sure that I would have, though, because the stuff was so personal, and one of the things that was worrying me was I really wanted a professional sort of watching my back if I was going to write these things about ESD and stuff. Are you telling me we're about to leave?
Yeah, but if you have one last...
Okay, well, I'll just skip. Okay, so when the publisher did finally agree to take the book, which was amazing, without an agent, I did get straight to a publisher, and a wonderful publisher. I asked them what it was about my book that got them, what was it that made them think they had what they were looking for? And they said it was three things. One is a voice, which you probably have heard that before. Voice, does that make sense? And that is your true, authentic voice. And for me, it's almost like you're sitting with me having coffee when you read my book. And that's just the way I do it. There are some people that have incredibly lyrical, beautiful, poetic voices, and maybe I can do that maybe 2 lines in the book, I don't know. But for me, I write the way I speak, and it is authentic, and they like it, because it's funny, I guess. The other is the hook, and that was the nun thing. They said, this is what set you apart from other mother-daughter memoirs, was that your mother did this sort of exotic, outrageous thing. And then the last thing was that the audience that I had a large audience out there. That was people like me and my friends in this sandwich generation who need information, who are dealing with their elderly parents and are stunned by the medical system when they're hit with it, and just don't even know the difference between Medicare and Medicaid, or Medicare and an HMO, and nursing home versus assisted living. All of that information is in the book, and you learn it as I learn it, in a fun way. And so those were the 3 things: the voice, the hook, and the audience. I think that's... So I'm glad to meet you guys.
That was great, Susan, and I'm sure we're all ready to go back and read that book we have online. There is time for some questions, and again, if you would stand up, say your name. Susan, take your question.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Lindsay. Is your mom still a nun?
Yes, she is. Oh, she is.
That's all I need to know. That's so cool.
Yeah, and that was one of the things, because she switched religions 9 times in my life. She was not always Orthodox Christian. She was born Episcopalian, and then she became Roman Catholic, and then she quit everything, and then she went back and was Episcopalian for a while, and then she was Roman Catholic, and then that wasn't good enough for her, so she was a different kind of Roman Catholic, and so when she said, I want you to pay for my funeral, my Orthodox Christian funeral in advance, and set up my burial plot at this church, I said to her, not if there's not a refund, because I don't believe that you're finished on your quest. That really made her mad. She was, but I think she's too tired to switch, and I think she actually has found the one that's absolutely perfect for her.
She's got some practice with the outfit now.
With the what?
Practice navigating the habit at this point.
Oh yeah, she's better with that. She doesn't wear that nun habit much anymore. She just dresses all in black.
Okay, another one in the back.
My name's Amanda, and I also write a lot of family memoir, and you talked a lot about finding a balance, the way that you portray people. So I was wondering if you consider
I think when I compare myself to other memoirists, I'm a family member first. That's more important to me than. But what I find is that I don't have to compromise my writing by showing deference to my family. I have somehow been able to find a way to get what I want out without stepping on anybody's toes. I think really what David Sedaris says is his family knows he loves them. And I think my family knows that I love them. And I think once you have forgiven, whoever it is that you're writing negative things about in your writing, you can write it in a way that is healing rather than hurting. And I just don't like the idea of having I know I can probably publish my next book, and that's very empowering. I can write whatever I want, and the people that I'm writing about don't have that power, and it's not fair. So I'm always keeping that in mind.
Someone else? I would just like to ask you what you found most challenging about the writing, maybe about the process.
I think the challenge really was what we were going through. That was incredibly stressful. The writing was a catharsis. The writing was my therapy, going through a difficult time. I will tell you, writing now, I have this terrible, some writers have this discipline where they say, okay, I spend 2 hours every morning, I get up, I have my coffee, and I won't let myself continue with my day until I've written for 2 hours or I've produced 1,000 words. There's that word counting thing again, I don't work that way, unfortunately, and maybe it's because I'm lazy, but I need to play spider solitaire, and take the dog for a walk, and go clean my office. I do all these things, and eventually I just kind of binge on writing, and I do something for 3 days, and I go absolutely mad, and then I kind of go back into order again. So it's hard. Writing is a hard process. You have to find your discipline. Hi.
This is Shannon, and I was just wondering, as you're writing, did you come to realize things? Because leads off something out, and you tend to realize things. So as you're writing, do you kind of come to terms with certain things in your past?
Definitely. Working out it's therapy. It really is therapy. And you'll write something and you don't even realize what you're writing about until you reread it and think, oh, I think I just suddenly realized something about myself. And that's part of why you want to do it, I think. Because, we can always improve ourselves. We can always figure ourselves out better. It's a great way to do it. Yes.
Hi, this is Samantha. I'm wondering a little bit about how you create narrative out of moments that might not have a clear narrative.
Might not what?
That might not have clear narrative structure. How do you create narrative when life's going to give you narrative? Does that make sense?
Thank God for laptops. If I had to write this freehand, it just wouldn't work for me. I'm so in awe of these great writers that some of them still write everything on a legal pad. I don't think I would be a writer today if I didn't have a laptop. What I do is I just spill out a bunch of stuff. My first thing is I'll do an outline. I'll think, okay, I need to get this, and this into this chapter. It doesn't mean that I actually do, but at least I got a list of stuff I need to get in. This event, this point, this character, this whatever. And then I force myself to write, and sometimes I'm just writing a conversation or something. And then I just kind of write a whole bunch of stuff, and I just vomit it onto my laptop. And then I look at it and I think, oh my God, that part should have been over here. We don't need to know that yet. We put that up here and that down there, and now we got to fill in with this extra thing that I didn't think of, and that's how it comes out for me. Does that make any sense? Is that answering your question?
Yeah.
It's not like a formula.
Okay,
Yes.
one more.
I'm Jocelyn Wilson. The conversation that you read us between yourself and the HMO person is very creative and very writerly. What did you think of that?
What did I think of it?
How did you?
How did I think it
how did
popped
that
out?
come to you?
It was like I'm telling you, it was like there was this little evil imp on my shoulder. I wasn't planning to do that, and the whole book isn't like that. That is like, that's a sort of a standout thing. I've never gotten a chance to read it out loud, so this was really exciting for me to get a chance to do that. But it is one of the things that everybody brings up is, how did you come up with that conversation with ESD? And I'm telling you, it was when I got to that moment where I said, this is Bertie Walker for I am a, and I could have said care assessor or whatever the job was. I don't have my notes, so I don't remember what it was, from ESD. But I was like, I'm not going to give this person the satisfaction of using their real job title. I'm going to write down what they really are, which is a heartless creep. And it was like, it just all came out of that. And all of a sudden, instead of writing the actual words I was hearing, I was writing what I was feeling I was hearing.
Well, it suggests that. Well, let me ask you this: what are you going to write next?
Oh, well, somebody said to me, you got to write fiction next because we don't want anything like this to ever happen to you ever again. And nothing like that has happened to me ever again. But I like writing about what's going on in my life. I really like writing what's going on in my life. And so I'm writing about what's going on in my life now, which is the children have gone to college. The nest is empty.
So you still think of yourself as a writer in the memoir vein?
Oh yeah, that's what I am now. I mean, I don't know if I'll write fiction, maybe someday.
That particular passage suggests that.
Yeah, I know, creative New Yorker, wacky little stuff. Yeah. Yeah, well,
Okay, I see more questions here. Time is up. Maybe you could ask Susan on the way out. But Susan, once again, this was great.